A bully humiliated a black girl by cutting off her braid, not knowing it was a huge mistake. This story has everything you usually see in the news, but rarely notice behind the dry headlines. Secret bullying, public humiliation, a fight for justice, and, most importantly, the resolve of one high school girl who's ready to stand up for herself in a hostile environment. Her name is Ayana Blake. What happened at prestigious Huntington High School shook not only the students, but also many adults. In this text, you'll learn how a random act of cruelty turned into a major scandal, and how attempts to bury evidence of bullying only gave strength to those who decided to speak out. Most importantly, you'll see what can happen when a single person stops being silent and finds an ally in a principal who dared to stand against the system. On the day Ayana Blake first walked through the doors of Huntington High, she felt like she was in a scene from a lavish movie about the lives of the golden youth. The pristine white columns at the entrance, the perfectly manicured lawns, and the sparkling stained glass windows reminded her of the promotional brochures of elite schools she had once seen online. It felt odd to walk on such a flawless pathway where there wasn't a single pothole or cracked tile. Just a few months earlier, she'd been navigating very different streets. Her old school in a tough part of the city was often compared to an aging warehouse, and the sports field was perpetually flooded by rusty pipes. Attending this elite institution on a scholarship was a big change in her life. Of course, Ayana wanted to seize this opportunity and make the most of it. New connections, a stronger academic program, and maybe a better shot at a prestigious college in the future. But from the very first moments, she felt the weight of curious and slightly judgmental stares. Not everyone looked at her with open hostility, but a sense of alienation hung in the air. In the admissions office for new students, she was greeted by Mrs. Grant, the principal's assistant. The woman was polite, but her smile seemed more like a professional mask than a genuine gesture. As Ayana waited for her paperwork to be processed, she overheard Mrs. Grant whispering to another staff member. "They said she got in through the city program grant. It's complicated." The word complicated sounded like a warning, as though just knowing she was from a certain neighborhood explained any potential problems. Ayana was then taken to the auditorium where new students were being introduced to homeroom teachers and club advisors. She took a seat in the back row so she wouldn't have to see the backs of the other new students, most of whom seemed to know each other, as they loudly discussed their summer adventures. On stage, the club advisors presented their activities like a fair of opportunities: journalism club, a programming circle, theater group, a volunteer squad. All of it promised fascinating prospects, yet Ayana felt no excitement. She'd already noticed the whispers and quick glances in her direction. Many probably knew she was on a scholarship for kids from at-risk neighborhoods and regarded her as someone outside their circle. When the general orientation ended, all the new students were invited to have juice and snacks in a small foyer. Ayana stood near the refreshment table, eyes lowered, unsure whom to talk to or how to start a conversation. Suddenly, 3 students approached her. At first glance, they seemed like typical high schoolers, though a bit more confident than most. A tall guy in a trendy sports jacket, he introduced himself as Jeremiah, but there was a challenge in his tone as if to say, "Do you know who I am?" Flanking him were Nate and Steve, nodding along with everything Jeremiah said. "So who are you?" Jeremiah asked, eyeing her up and down. "Ayana," she replied quietly, trying not to show fear or nervousness. "New, huh? I heard you got some special status here," he said, as though testing how aware she was of her so-called uniqueness. Ayana felt a knot in her stomach, but refused to show any hint of insecurity. "Yeah, a scholarship. Why do you ask?" she said, keeping her voice steady. Steve and Nate snickered as if they'd heard a joke. Jeremiah gave her a cold stare. Got it. We have this tradition. If someone comes from the other side of town, we like to ask why they're here and what they expect from our school. His tone was sarcastic, more of a challenge than a genuine inquiry. Ayana shrugged and tried to respond calmly. Even then, she realized something was off. The trio walked away, exchanging smug smiles, and Ayana felt as though they had branded her with an invisible label. The bell rang for the first advisory meeting, and Ayana hurried to the classroom. Sitting at a desk, listening to the teacher explain the schedule, she understood she was in a new world of opportunity and uncertainty. Her first encounter with Jeremiah, Nate, and Steve suggested trouble was on the horizon. Right after her first day, Ayana went home to the tiny house she shared with her mother. Her mom, who worked long shifts at a nearby cafe, smiled when she came in, but quickly noticed something was bothering her daughter. Ayana didn't give all the details. It had only been one day, and she didn't want to worry her mother, who was already stressed about her demanding schedule and overdue bills. Ayana stuck to vague comments about the new school, the beautiful building, and the many opportunities. But deep down, she felt a growing fear that those opportunities would come with a dark side. Over the following weeks, her worries were confirmed. Jeremiah, Nate, and Steve didn't attack her openly. Instead, they picked their moments when no teachers or staff were around, pushing her in the hallways or making degrading remarks in the locker rooms. They would laugh sarcastically if she glanced in their direction after a shove. But the worst came in the form of online harassment in the school's chat forums, where anonymous users posted cruel memes and messages labeling her the poor girl from the projects, the orphan among noble ladies and gentlemen. Teachers didn't intervene, even though some witnessed these sneering comments in class. When Ayana tried to bring her concerns to her homeroom teacher, Mrs. Randolph, the woman sighed and said, "It's just teenage rudeness. Try not to take it personally. They're just joking. They're like that." The look on Mrs. Randolph's face told Ayana she wanted no part of this fight, especially not with kids from families that donated large sums to the school. One evening, while Ayana was doing her homework, her phone started lighting up non-stop. Someone had posted a fake video in the school's group chat with captions about the new girl who has nothing. They even added an obnoxious soundtrack listing all the extra costs or hidden troubles she might bring to the school. In the comments, Jeremiah and Steve kept fueling the fire with mocking emojis and sarcastic remarks. Ayana fought back tears, unsure whom to approach for help. Her mom shook her head and suggested talking to the administration, but Ayana feared it would only make things worse. A few days after the video incident, she ran into the three bullies in the hallway. She tried to pass by, but Jeremiah stepped in front of her, leaning against a locker. "What's with the sad face? Don't like your new place?" he asked, a mocking smile on his lips. "Leave me alone," Ayana whispered, trying not to look him in the eye. "Oh, come on, we're just being friendly," Steve said with fake cheer. "If we wanted to hurt you, you'd know it already." Nate sniggered. A chill ran down Ayana's spine, but she sidestepped them and kept walking. Suddenly, someone yanked her backpack, nearly knocking her off balance. Laughter echoed behind her. She spun around and asked, "You think this is funny?" Fixing Nate with a glare. He smirked. "Don't you?" The worst part was that other students watched, but did nothing. Everyone knew Jeremiah, Nate, and Steve were the basement kings of the school. Sticking up for Ayana meant risking trouble for yourself. Ayana felt close to the breaking point. Headaches had started to plague her. It became harder to concentrate in class, but she tried to hide it, still hoping the bullies might lose interest. She was wrong. A worse blow was coming. It happened on a sunny day in late September, when the schoolyard was usually crowded with students after classes. That day, Principal Hughes was out at a district conference, and the teachers were busy preparing for some charitable auction. Everyone was preoccupied. Ayana was sitting on a bench behind the gym, waiting for drama club practice. She'd grown to admire the club advisor, who was energetic and open-minded, and she found a shred of safety in that environment. She was skimming through a textbook when she heard familiar voices. Nate and Steve were speaking quietly, and Jeremiah said something like, "There she is, sitting there without a clue." Ayana's heart sank. She stood and tried to walk away, but the trio quickly surrounded her. "Where are you going?" Jeremiah asked with a sneer. "We just want to talk." Ayana decided not to beg them to leave her alone, but she tried to keep calm. "I'm busy," she said, scanning the empty yard and realizing no one would come to help. The boys exchanged glances. They seemed to have planned something. Jeremiah nodded to Nate, who lunged forward and grabbed Ayana's arm. Fear flashed in her eyes, and she struggled to break free. But it was too late. Steve muttered, "Hurry up before someone sees!" And Ayana felt her backpack hit the ground as her hair fell into someone else's hands. It happened in seconds. The sharp snip of scissors, and her long braid, a symbol of her identity, grown over many years, fell onto the concrete. She was so shocked she couldn't even scream at first. For a few seconds, she just stared at the severed hair, unable to believe it was real. Steve and Nate smirked, while Jeremiah wore a grim, mocking expression. "Don't act so special. Welcome to the real world," he said. For Ayana, it was more than humiliation. It was an attack on her sense of self, her heritage, everything that made her who she was. Her hair had always been a family point of pride. Her mom spent years teaching her how strong and beautiful a young woman could be. And now that pride was lying on the ground, cut off, symbolizing the trio's abuse of power. When a few staff members ran out in response to Ayana's screams, the bullies ran off. The worst part was that no one chased after them. It was as if people didn't know how to react. Ayana wept, clutching the remains of her hair, her thoughts racing. "They won't stop if I keep silent." That evening, Ayana summoned the courage to file a formal complaint with the school's administration, describing the physical attack in detail. She emailed Principal Hughes and attached photos of her severed braid. She expected an immediate response, maybe an emergency assembly, or at least the bully's immediate suspension. But for several days, the administration seemed bent on smoothing things over, telling her, "We're looking into it. Be patient. And don't make too much noise. It could hurt your future." Social media exploded. Many classmates expressed sympathy, but some blamed Ayana, saying, "She brought this on herself by trying to attract attention," or that she was asking for pity. It was devastating. She realized she couldn't face this alone. If the school was trying to bury the issue, she needed allies, or to go beyond the school altogether. Returning from the district conference, Principal Hughes learned about the disturbing incident. His reaction was different. He didn't want to bury the matter, even though influential parents, furious that some girl from the projects was tarnishing the school's reputation, were already pressuring him. But Hughes had his personal reasons for despising such situations. Years ago, at another school where he taught history, a similar case of bullying had destroyed a girl's educational future. At that time, he was just a teacher with no real power. Now, as principal, he was determined to stop it from happening again. He met with Ayana in his office behind closed doors, asking her to recount everything in detail. She held nothing back. She talked about the repeated humiliations, anonymous online attacks, and how most teachers turned a blind eye. Hughes listened, deeply affected. "I can't promise it'll be simple," he said, "but I promise we'll fight for what's right." He instructed his assistant, Mrs. Grant, to gather all the complaints against Jeremiah, Nate, and Steve from previous years. To his dismay, there were several old reports. Students had complained about verbal abuse and bullying by the trio, yet each time, the matter had gone nowhere. The paperwork got lost, and those who spoke out ended up transferring to other schools or simply giving up. Realizing how deep the problem ran, Hughes decided to collect solid evidence: photos, chats, security footage. Ayana agreed to help, providing everything she had. Soon, other students joined them. Under the principal's protection, they shared their experiences of harassment and threats at the hands of the trio. Many, however, asked to remain anonymous, still fearing retribution. At the same time, Hughes faced the parents of these bullies, who were furious at the accusation of racism and bullying. One influential father, a local businessman, threatened, "If you don't stop this nonsense, our donations to the school will end. And think about what that means for your job, Hughes." Yet the principal had made up his mind. There would be no compromise. Not only did he want to hold the offenders accountable, but he also wanted to expose a system that had long turned a blind eye to such behavior. Unexpected support came from the school psychologist, Mrs. Ortiz, who offered Ayana her help. She took detailed notes of Ayana's account and of the other students' experiences, advising Hughes on both the emotional and legal aspects of the situation. Meanwhile, rumors of a racist incident at Huntington High started leaking into local media and social networks. People didn't yet know the full details, but photos of Ayana's chopped-off braid and eyewitness statements were spreading, sparking outrage. Sensing their control slipping, Jeremiah, Nate, and Steve tried to downplay it as a silly prank, misunderstood by everyone. But now that the principal openly sided with the victims, parental backing wasn't enough to shield them from the gravity of the offense. For the first time, they realized their power and their family's money might not protect them from real consequences. As the school prepared for an emergency meeting with parents, new revelations came to light. The mother of a younger student said her daughter had also faced mockery and humiliation over her skin color and appearance. Another parent mentioned that her son quit the football team because Jeremiah decided who was worthy of playing. Stories like this kept emerging. People had previously stayed silent, believing, better to keep your head down, so as not to lose what little they had. But Ayana's example, challenging the elite bullies, triggered a domino effect. One by one, parents and students began speaking about the things that had weighed on them for so long. On the day of the meeting, the auditorium was packed. Principal Hughes took the stage and said, "For too long, we've ignored these issues, not wanting to get involved. But now we have proof that certain students behaved in unacceptable ways and that the school often failed to respond appropriately." He presented reports, documents, complaints, screenshots of online messages, and surveillance footage. He showed copies of parent grievances that had mysteriously never made it to the right authorities. When it was Ayana's turn to speak, she calmly but firmly told her story again, declaring she would no longer keep silent and would defend herself and others. Ayana's mother added a few emotional words that deeply moved many in the audience. "I can't allow my daughter to be humiliated just because she comes from another neighborhood and doesn't have the same finances some of you do." Principal Hughes was visibly moved. He admitted feeling ashamed that such things could happen right under his nose. The bullies' parents tried to defend their sons, claiming the entire matter was exaggerated and fueled by racial stereotypes. But the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses recounted instances of explicit insults directed at various students. A school committee ultimately decided to suspend Jeremiah, Nate, and Steve for the rest of the semester. They also faced legal proceedings for bullying and assault. since physically cutting someone's hair is an act of violence, handed over to the police. The bullies' parents were stunned the school didn't protect their boys like it used to. Even worse for them, their family reputations began to suffer. Local social media users called for boycotts of the parents' businesses and some charities, refused donations from them. Ayana still bore psychological scars from the ordeal, but she found support in the school psychologist, caring teachers, and Principal Hughes. She gave interviews to local reporters who came after hearing about the shocking case. It wasn't easy, but she knew that silence would only perpetuate the cycle of abuse. As a result, Huntington High overhauled its anti-bullying policies. They introduced anonymous hotlines, regular training sessions for teachers and students, and launched an initiative called School Equality, offering lessons on racial and cultural sensitivity. Some parents grumbled that this is all for show, but most agreed these changes were long overdue. Principal Hughes kept his job despite facing intense pressure, threats, hints of his dismissal, and accusations of stoking the conflict. All came his way. But public opinion and multiple testimonies supporting Ayana and other victims upheld justice. A couple of months after the incident, Ayana wore her new short hairstyle with confidence. She still missed her old braid, but her mother's words, "It will grow back even stronger," resonated with her. She felt more resilient inside. She joined a student volunteer group, helping new students feel more at ease. Whenever she saw someone being mistreated, she no longer walked away. Everyone now knew that if someone tried to bully someone else in front of Ayana Blake, the truth would come to light. Though Ayana's story began with humiliation and pain, it concluded with important changes not just for her, but for the entire school. Those who once preferred to ignore bullying realized it could lead to real consequences and public backlash. Inspired by Ayana's example, other victims also began to speak up. Social inequality and racial prejudice wouldn't vanish overnight, but at Huntington High, the old environment, where bullying was considered just part of school life, was gone. Today, a new principal reigns at that school. Supported by its administration, no one should be afraid to attend class, whether they come from a poor neighborhood or a wealthy family. And that, above all, became possible thanks to one brave student and a principal who refused to accept a long-standing culture of silence. That's how the story of Ayana Blake and Huntington High ends. A school once steeped in arrogance and fear, but her example lives on as a reminder of how one voice, backed by the resolve of an honest leader, can shift even the most entrenched norms and give hope to many who had resigned themselves to enduring their struggles alone.